Hey, thanks for stopping by. My name is Tyler, and today I'm happy to announce that I have passed my Microsoft Fundamentals AZ-900 exam. I passed with a score of 921, which weirdly enough actually lined up with the date that I took the test. So today's the 22nd of September, and yesterday was the 21st, the day I took the test. And so the date was 921 and my score was 921. Kind of random, but I thought that was neat. I wanted to hop on here and make a video and go through everything I used to study for this certification more in depth. In previous AZ-900 videos, I've talked about what I've been doing, but I never reviewed the study materials because it's really hard for me to gauge if I haven't taken the test yet. So now that I've passed the test, I feel qualified to talk on the available study materials and which ones I think are worth purchasing. So without further ado, let's get into it. Really quick, before we get into the rest of the video, I also did want to say thank you for 1,500 subscribers. That's crazy. I appreciate the support so much. Thank you guys a ton. So the AZ-900 is actually one of the shortest certifications I've taken so far. So that's going up against things like Cloud Practitioner, Network Plus, things along that line. I think it only took me 5, maybe 6 weeks to study for. And if you look online, a lot of people actually don't take that much time to study for it, but I like to be as thorough as I can with my studies, regardless of if I think I can take the test after a week and a half and pass it. I really want to make sure I get my fundamentals, so when I move on to harder certifications, I'm not having to go back and relearn basics. So I took my time on it, and I really think I did a thorough job with studying. So let's go through it and talk about all of the various things that I use to study. The first thing I did for the AZ-900 was I watched the Udemy course by Scott Duffy. First time through, I didn't take notes or anything. It was more just casually watch it, get familiar with some of the vocab terms, not really worried about absorbing everything the first time around, rather just getting a general understanding of things. My thoughts on Scott's Udemy course are super positive. I really thought it was a great course. There are, at least in my experience with the questions I got, there were a few questions I got in the exam that were not covered in his course. However, it covered pretty much 95% of anything you could be tested on. So I do highly recommend it as a resource, but I think you should still supplement it with other things, and we'll kind of get into that later. Overall, absolutely worth it, especially if you can get it on sale. I know there's always sales on Udemy, and I think I got it marked down from like $120 or something to like $12. So wait for that sale to come around and purchase that course. I absolutely think it's worth the $12, $15 you might pay for it, because it does do a pretty good job at going over the topics. So following that up, I actually did a blend of kind of two study resources at once. The first one being Microsoft Learn and their AZ-900 path, and the second being the study guide written by Steve Miles. And I think both of these were really good resources. Of course, out of all of the study resources, I would have to recommend the Microsoft Learn modules because they are administered by Microsoft, and it's going to go over everything you need to pass this test. And along with that, they also have free practice tests on their website. So absolutely recommend Microsoft Learn. It's also free, so that's a huge plus as well. So as far as if you have to pick one thing to use, I would say Microsoft Learn. Can't recommend that one enough. And then as for the study guide, it had a lot of really good information in it, and I think it's worth reading through, especially if this is your first certification. It's really just going to help cement those fundamental concepts just a little bit harder than something like just watching a course. Not to say you can't get it from a course, but personally I find when I'm reading through material, I tend to absorb it a little bit better. Now, if this is not your first certification or you've worked with Microsoft before, I would put this in the optional category. I feel confident saying you can go through Microsoft Learn and go through Scott's Udemy course and probably be okay. So it's a good resource. However, I don't know if it's necessary to pass the exam. Following the Microsoft Learn modules and the study guide by Steve, I actually went back to Scott's Udemy course and watched through the full thing again and took notes this time. So I built myself a little notes packet here. I took notes on everything other than the fundamentals of cloud part of that course. The reason I skipped over that is having been through the cloud practitioner and the solutions architect associate by AWS, cloud fundamentals is something I feel really, really strong on, and I didn't think it was worth spending the time to write it down, as I'm sure I probably wrote it down in this notes packet. And it's just a concept that I've been around for over 2 years now, so I kind of brushed over that. However, this notes packet consists of anything in that course that was Microsoft specific. So all of the services, all of the other topics, it came out to, I think, 20 pages or so. It is published on my LinkedIn if you guys want to view it yourself. So it's up there. LinkedIn will be in the description if you care to view it. As for if I would recommend it or if I think it's necessary to pass the AZ-900, I do recommend it. However, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a little bit overkill to take 18 pages of notes on a fundamental level exam, especially because it's not my first cloud certification. If it was my first cloud certification, I think it is something that will be hugely beneficial and really help get those concepts down. The main reason I did it is even though I knew I probably didn't need to, I wanted to be very, very thorough because nobody likes to retake a certification test. And I wanted to make sure I didn't have to. So I went a little bit overboard and took notes on it anyway. I don't think it's necessary, especially if you have other certifications or you're familiar with Azure at all. But I also don't think it's a complete waste of time. So, following up the creation of this guy, I finally went ahead and started doing some practice tests. I used 3 different sets of practice tests from 3 different places, and I have thoughts on all of them. So, let's talk about it. The first set of practice tests I used were from Scott's Udemy course. I think they were good, especially because they were included in the course. You didn't have to pay extra for them. However, my one complaint is they weren't at the level of difficulty that the AZ-900 tests at. I just felt like his practice questions were a little bit too easy and not worded tricky enough. It sounds weird, but if you guys have taken Microsoft certs, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I can't say I recommend his practice tests as a standalone resource. If you're not going to go through his course, I don't think it's worth buying the full course just to get his practice tests because, at least personally, I found them a fair bit easier than the actual exam. And I don't want to make it sound like these aren't worth doing or they're completely bad. They're not a waste of time to do because they're in scope and they're on the things that you're going to be tested on. However, I just think there's better options out there. And one of the practice tests I would recommend above Scott's are the ones from Microsoft Learn. So if you guys didn't know, you can actually get a free practice test on Microsoft Learn for the AZ-900. I would say this is pretty much the gold standard because not only is it administered by Microsoft, the people that are actually testing you, so you know everything is going to be absolutely in scope. Another huge benefit is just the way the questions are worded. On that Microsoft Learn practice test, it is almost identical to the actual exam in terms of how they ask the question. And that is such an important thing in a practice test. For those of you that have taken the CCNA, I think you'll know what I'm talking about, where you can have amazing practice tests that test you on the knowledge, but Cisco asks their questions in a super strange manner on the actual exam, and it can make it really, really difficult to get the right answer, even if you understand the topic. So being able to take practice tests from the same people that are giving you your real test is always a good idea. Now, the third and final set of practice tests I used were from Tutorials Dojo, and I would have to really highly recommend these. You get, I believe, 120 unique questions for like $8. It was $8 or $9. It was super, super cheap, and you get a ton of questions. As far as difficulty goes, I would say these are pretty close to the exam, maybe just like the tiniest bit easier. Definitely closer than the questions from Scott's course, but still not quite as difficult as the actual exam. It's close enough where I don't think it's a super significant problem, but it is absolutely worth noting. Now, the reason I recommend the Tutorials Dojo ones so highly is because you get such a wide array of questions that it's really going to help narrow down which topics you need to study a little bit more before the real exam. With 120 questions, you're going to be able to see which areas you need to work on. And I think that's super, super important. So highly recommend those. And for $9 for 120 questions, really can't beat that. So as far as practice questions go, I would absolutely recommend taking the Microsoft Learn ones. You really can't go wrong. They're free. They're from Microsoft. They're worded the same way as the actual exam questions, which is huge. As for Scott's questions, if you already have the course and you're going through it, why not take the tests? And again, his course I actually do highly recommend, but I just didn't think his practice questions were as difficult as they could have been. Now, if you're willing to spend a couple dollars, I highly recommend getting the Tutorials Dojo questions. You get a ton of questions. You really get to test yourself on the full scope of questions that can be asked, which is super important. So you're less likely to find yourself on the actual exam confused on a topic or seeing a question that is completely unfamiliar, which is a pretty scary place to be in. If you're willing to spend the money, I say get all three. Why not? There's nothing wrong with more practice, but if you're really on like a tight budget and you don't want to spend more than you need to, I would say go Microsoft Learn and Tutorials Dojo. And that's everything. So that is start to finish every resource and everything that I did to prepare for my AZ-900 exam. I don't think it was the hardest certification in the world to achieve. However, I don't think it's as easy as some corners of the internet say it is. It does still require some disciplined study, and you still do have to know what you're talking about in order to pass this test. I think it's worth going through, taking your time, and really understanding the concepts before you take the test, rather than trying to blow through Microsoft Learn in a week and testing on day 6. Not only does that lower your chances of passing, it also isn't going to teach you quite as much as like a full-length course or a couple weeks of really, really strong studying will. And for these foundational level exams, I do think it's worth slowing down and maybe doing more than you need to pass the test to make sure that you have those strong foundations to continue to build knowledge off of. But that will wrap us up. Again, thank you guys very much for watching. If you want to follow my degree-free journey through the tech world, of course, subscribe. But that's going to be everything. I'll see you later.